Governor Gary Johnson. After a successful career as a businessman, he became the Republican governor from New Mexico from 1994 to 2003. He was the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate in 2012, getting more votes than any LP candidate in history.
I would like to be your nominee. If you're looking for someone who will tell the truth regardless of the consequences, if you're looking for somebody who will acknowledge mistakes, because the quickest way to fix mistakes is to acknowledge them as quickly as possible, and if you want somebody who knows what it is to just put one foot in front of the other in dogged pursuit of any goal set, and in this case it's to raise the profile of the Libertarian Party nationwide, please give me your vote.
For those who are listening to a libertarian debate for the very first time and don't know what a libertarian is, please explain what a libertarian is and what is the difference between a libertarian and a conservative.
Broadly speaking, libertarians are fiscally conservative and socially liberal, and so when it comes to conservative, let's not forget that originally a classic liberal was a conservative. So conservatives, bottom line, are about smaller government. Libertarians, bottom line, are about smaller government.
Most libertarians think both major parties are bad, but that the Republican Party is, at least as to economic issues, the lesser of two evils. What do you say to people who believe that in the best case scenario, the Libertarian candidate this year might get 10%? In a close election, the Libertarian will likely take more votes from the Republican, making it more likely that Hillary will win the election. What is your response to that line of thinking?
Factually speaking, my name has appeared in 3 national polls, 10%, 10%, and 11%. And in those polls, they actually did an analysis and pulled more votes away from Hillary than from Trump. But I think at the end of the day, we pull equally from both sides. And the idea isn't just to get to 10%. The idea here is to actually get to 15% and be in the presidential debates, creating a real opportunity to tell the people of the world a different view on all of these topics.
Donald Trump, when asked to name 3 functions of government, said national security, health care, and education. Where did he go wrong?
You know, I really don't even want to comment on Donald Trump. I really don't. I really think that when Donald Trump talks about deporting 11 million illegal immigrants, that's just wrong. When he talks about building a fence across the border, that is just wrong. When he talks about killing the families of Muslim terrorists, that is just wrong. When he talks about free market, that he's going to force Apple to make their iPads and their iPhones in the United States, that's just wrong. When he talks about a 35% tariff, that's just wrong. When he says he's going to bring back waterboarding or torture or whatever he's thinking, that's just wrong. He's just wrong.
Should illegal immigration be stopped? Do you believe in open borders? If so, what does open borders mean?
We should make it as easy as possible for somebody that wants to come into this country and work to be able to get a work visa. And a work visa should entail a background check and a social security card that applicable taxes get paid. We should not build a fence across the border. We should not deport 11 million illegal immigrants. We need to embrace immigration in this country. We need to recognize that these are the cream of the crop when it comes to workers coming across the border. They are not taking jobs that U.S. citizens want, and it is not an issue of lower pay unless it's an issue of language, and they are the first ones that recognize that.
Should taxpayers pay for or subsidize education at any level, whether K through 12 or post-secondary education?
As governor of New Mexico, I was more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. For 6 straight years, I proposed a full-blown voucher program to bring competition to public education, unleash tens of millions of entrepreneurs entrepreneurs to deliver better education in this country. With regard to the federal role when it comes to education, abolish the Federal Department of Education. They give each state 11 cents out of every school dollar that every state spends, but it comes with 14 cents worth of strings attached, 15 cents worth of strings attached, and now Obama wants to add a bathroom to that, so now it's up to 16 cents.
Even President Obama said the three biggest entitlements programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, are, in his word, unsustainable. They comprise nearly 50% of the federal budget. What would you do about them?
I think the only way that you reform Medicaid and Medicare is to devolve those functions to the states. 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice. As governor of New Mexico, in my heart of hearts, if given a fixed amount of money, I could have delivered health care to those on welfare and those over 65. With regard to Social Security, it's absolutely fixable, but it's raising the retirement age, it's having a very fair means testing, it's being able to self-direct those funds in a way that you see fit. One of the great untold inequities in our country is that poor people who pay into Social Security their entire lives and die, that money reverts to the government as opposed to their heirs.
If you don't believe government should force people into some sort of Social Security or forced savings system, what happens when someone has grown old but was too indifferent or irresponsible to have set aside savings? What should happen to that person?
Well, I'm not advocating that Social Security should be abolished. It should be self-directed as much as possible, and as President of the United States, I would sign legislation that would allow 100% of Social Security funds to be self-directed, but I don't think that they're going to pass that. So in the meantime, like I say, the reforms that are needed, raise the retirement age, you could have a very fair means testing, self-directed funds, and allow those that pay into Social Security and die before the amount of money that they paid in was actually paid back. Perhaps that could be passed on to their heirs, and that could also be a part of very fair means testing.
Does global warming or climate change pose a threat to the planet?
Well, I think the real question here is carbon emissions, and we should be, as consumers, we are looking to reduce carbon emission. And in that context, the free market has bankrupted coal. It's something that we've demanded, it's something that has happened.
Let him talk!
I'm not smart enough to say whether or not global warming is man-made. Certainly there is climate change that is occurring. Does that have to do with the sun and the relationship of the earth? I know that Harrison Schmitt, who walked on the moon and was senator from New Mexico, he really questions whether global warming takes place or not. But that said, carbon emissions is something that we genuinely, as human beings, want to see reduced. Coal is a good example of having been bankrupted by the free market. This is free market forces at work that have refused to put any money into coal. It's a fact. It's a fact.
What taxes, if any, do you believe in? How should government fund its essential duties and obligations?
I've always said the best example of a libertarian tax is the gas tax. You use gas, you drive on the highways. Now the problem with the gas tax is it gets co-opted for other things. But that said, taxation is theft. I'm running for President of the United States, so if elected, I'm going to pass any legislation that reduces taxes in this country, however that is. But what I would advocate is eliminating income tax, corporate tax, and because we would do that, we would then be able to abolish the IRS, which is about as tyrannical as it gets. I would be elected President of the United States. I don't think Congress is going to abolish income tax and corporate tax without replacing with something. I think that they could replace it with a consumption tax. I would ask you to look at the fair tax as a way to dot the I's and cross the T's on how to accomplish one federal consumption tax.
Should there be a minimum wage? If not, how do you prevent employees from, as the left often says, exploiting workers?
I really think that we're missing the boat on this argument. Look, $15 minimum wage, let's raise it to $75. Come on, let's be the most prosperous nation in the world. Let's raise the minimum wage to $75. Well, when you think about it, gee, no, you can't do that for anybody advocating the minimum wage. Oh, you can't do that, but you can do $15 or $12 or $7.50. Look, the minimum wage is the minimum wage. That's what it's called. It's not a living wage, it's a starting wage, it's the minimum wage.
Should government, whether state or local, fund infrastructure, roads, bridges, sewers, electrical grids? And if government does not do it, who or what will?
Well, infrastructure is the best example of how you can privatize this entire function, and you can do this through user fees to be able to accomplish that. Should government be in charge of that process? Well, you're probably going to have government administrate over it or issue a request for proposal to see this happen, but no, government shouldn't be involved in this. The private sector can be involved in this. Entrepreneurs can be involved in this and can apply the best taxes possible, which are user fees, by those that in fact use the infrastructure.
Assume someone has a pre-existing medical condition and cannot get health insurance. What would you do about it?
When it comes to healthcare, what we need is a real free market approach to healthcare. And by the way, healthcare is about as far removed from the free market as it possibly could be. We would have health insurance to cover ourselves for catastrophic injury and illness, and we would pay as you go in a system that was very, very affordable. We would have stitches are us. We would have gallbladders are us. We would have x-rays are us. For a pre-existing condition, look, before President Obama's affordable health care plan, nobody was going without health care in this country. It in fact became somebody with a pre-existing condition was always receiving health care. It was just an issue of who paid for it. I think we've muddied this. I think Supreme Court Justice Roberts was right when he said that health care is a tax. My health care insurance premiums have quadrupled, and I haven't been to see a doctor in 4 years.
On trade, would you continue trading with partners who impose tariffs on American goods and on those who engage in, as Donald Trump puts it, currency manipulation?
Look, I believe in free trade. There shouldn't be tariffs anywhere, and the United States can lead on this by example. When you talk about 35% tariff on foreign goods, who ends up paying for that? Well, we do.
What should be done about the Federal Reserve? Is there a legitimate function for the Fed?
As President of the United States, if Congress were to submit legislation to me to end the Federal Reserve, I would sign that legislation. But I don't think they're going to send that legislation to me. I don't think that that's going to happen. But if they did, I would sign it. I think that those functions could be taken up by regional banks. That said, it is a rigged game. When banks are able to get money at 0%, they're able to take away our opportunities, for example, from the 2008 financial crisis, where we could have stepped in, those of us that saved money, and actually bought houses at a real bargain, but no, we weren't allowed to. The big banks were able to step in and scoop that up for themselves, and now we have this re-inflation bubble that has occurred with regard to housing. So it is a rigged game. We need to audit the Federal Reserve. I think the reason why we haven't had a bill to audit the Federal Reserve is just how frightening it might be to find out how many assets, in fact, they are buying all across the world, and that might cause a collapse of sorts if that were actually known.
What government cabinet departments would you eliminate?
Of course, as President of the United States, it's subject to what Congress submits to you at the end of the day. Count on me to sign off on any legislation that abolishes any federal agency. But those that come to mind, if I were the dictator and could wave a magic wand, would be the Department of Commerce, Housing and Urban Development, Education. I realize this is not a cabinet agency, but an agency that Drug Enforcement Administration, NSA. Is an executive order, 12333, signed under Truman, turn the satellites away from us, please. Turn them on the enemies. Well, ostensibly, it's been turned on the enemies, us, and this is the government. This is tyranny.
What do you think of the Iran deal? Does it pose a threat to Israel? And if so, is that a concern of America?
On the surface, I initially supported the Iran deal. It just made sense, but this may just sound crazy, but it turns out that Iran is categorically proven to finance terrorism. They are the #1 financiers of terrorism around the world, and because we released $165 billion, Secretary of State Kerry himself admitted that some of this money would go to terrorism. No, we should not have signed the Iran deal. We should have not unfrozen those assets. We could have engaged in free trade on an ongoing free trade basis, but no, to have released that $165 billion, there will be terrorism funded out of that.
President Obama has called the Hiroshima bomb an act of evil. Do you agree?
I don't want to judge actions that happened so many years ago. President Truman was faced with an obviously difficult situation based on millions of lives having been lost. I don't want to second guess in any way. One of the questions that I have regarding the bomb was, one bomb was dropped. What were and perhaps this is in history and I'm just not aware of it, but after one bomb was dropped, why was there not as much outreach as possible to have prevented the second bomb? But I'm not second guessing here. Difficult decision made in difficult times, and millions of lives have been lost, and so many of those lives were American lives. And we'd have lost hundreds of thousands of more American lives if we'd have had to go into invade.
Do you believe radical Islam poses a threat to Europe, America, to Western civilization itself?
I do. It's a very real threat. I think that Congress needs to get involved in decision-making on how we address this. They have abdicated their responsibility to the president and to the military, and we need an open debate and discussion on how we do deal with this. Something that, like I say, has not happened.
Was it wrong for America to have intervened and fought in World War I? Was it wrong for America to have intervened and fought in World War II?
I don't know.
Thank you.
We spend more on our military than the next 15 or so nations combined. How large should our military be? Do we spend too much? Where would you cut?
I think we spend more than all the other countries in the world combined, just by a little bit, but more than all the other countries in the world combined. I would look to reduce the size of the military, and I don't say defense, I say that it's offense and it's the military. I would be looking to reduce those expenditures by 20%, and that wouldn't be going back but a handful of years. I think you need a real skeptic at the table when it comes to military budgets. The fact that we have 100,000 troops on the ground in Europe, does anybody see the logic in that? And yet it continues to go on and on and on. As I mentioned earlier, we have executive treaties not implemented by Congress. We have executive treaties with 69 countries that we are obliged to defend their borders. This just doesn't seem right. The fact that we have bases anywhere in the world when right now we can fly aircraft from the United States, and because of our refueling capabilities, we really don't need any Air Force bases. So how about a skeptic, and let's start with a 20% reduction in the military, which would not reduce our ability to provide for an impenetrable national defense.
Would you, as president, pull the United States out of NATO, the International Monetary Fund, and or the United Nations?
I think that we should have diplomacy to the hilt. I mean, we should engage ourselves in diplomacy to avoid what would, in fact, and is, in fact, a military conflict. I think the greatest threat in the world right now is North Korea. At some point, Kim is going to have intercontinental ballistic missiles that work. How about engaging China in a hand-in-hand, let's do something about North Korea. Let's do something about Kim, unify the Koreas, and be able to withdraw our 40,000 troops that are in South Korea.
Are libertarians isolationists?
Make no mistake, if the United States is attacked, we will attack back. And we should have an invincible national defense, not offense. And so diplomacy to the hilt. Engage countries in talk, in negotiation. Ultimately, negotiation, I think, is free trade. Free trade, I think, unites the world, and that's something that needs to be always promoted. But no, the United States, as President of the United States, no, I'm not isolationist.
As between the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, which is the most anti-freedom, anti-libertarian? Or put another way, from a libertarian point of view, which is the lesser of two evils?
That's a slam dunk. No, they're both equally, they equally have their warts. And I do say warts. Let's engage them in civil dialogue. The opportunity exists this election to really take from both sides, to try and point out that each side has their strong points, and that's what the Libertarian Party represents, are those strong points on each side.
When does life begin? At what point has a pregnancy gone so far that it should be a crime for a woman to have an abortion?
I don't think that most people realize that the law of the land is Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And what the law of the land says is that a woman has the right to have an abortion up to the point of viability of the fetus. And the Supreme Court defines that as being able to sustain the life of the fetus outside of the womb, even if by artificial means. That's the law of the land. That said, I don't think there should ever be criminal penalties against a woman. And that said, how can there be any more difficult choice than having an abortion? The issue should only be with the woman involved, and I support the woman in making that most difficult of choice.
Do you believe in any form of gun control? Should a child be able to walk into a gun store and get a gun? What about ex-felons? What about automatic weapons like AK-47s or M16s?
I don't. I've been a gun supporter my entire life. In 1995, as governor of New Mexico, I got to sign concealed carry legislation, which at that time was really cutting edge. I've stood up through Our America initiative to initiatives to limit the number of bullets in the magazine, limit the caliber of bullets. Look, I'm just in the belief that if you start limiting big caliber guns, only criminals are going to have big caliber guns. If you're going to try and take the guns away from everybody, the criminals are going to be left with the guns.
Should one have to get a government-issued license to marry? If same-sex marriage should be legal, what about multiple spouses? Where, if anywhere, would you draw the line?
Well, initially I said we should get government out of the business of marriage completely. But it turns out that and this was in response to gay marriage and the ability of same-sex couples to marry or marry whomever it is that you love. Get government out of that business. Well, it turns out that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of laws that actually contain the word marriage and that would have to be amended. Hundreds, thousands of laws that would have to be amended, as opposed to government recognizing same-sex marriage. One piece of legislation, that was my then support of one piece of legislation.
North Carolina passed a law that said, as to the public sector, one shall use the bathroom that corresponds with the gender on his or her birth certificate. How do you feel about that law?
As governor, I did have the distinction of possibly vetoing more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined. If this legislation would have been put on my desk, I would have vetoed it.
What kind of person would you put on the Supreme Court And should Congress hold hearings on Obama's nominee?
Congress should hold hearings on Obama's nomination. I think that constitutionally he did his duty, and constitutionally the Congress should do theirs. That said, I always prided myself on the appointments that I made, and I always made it a point to personally conduct those interviews myself. So with regard to judges in New Mexico, vacancies that occurred, I think my reputation is that I appointed really damn good judges. And it was really based on personal integrity, questions that I asked. I would ask the hypothetical: would you administer the death penalty for someone who committed graffiti? The legislature passed the bill, I signed it, the Supreme Court upheld that yes, you could administer the death penalty for graffiti, and here it is. You've got the first case sitting in front of you for graffiti. The guy admits to it. What would you do? Well, a lot of them said, hey, the law is the law, I'd sentence him to death. Some said, well, I don't know. I mean, the best answer of all was, you know what? If I had that situation, I would have to resign, because I would believe that unethically that I could not administer that sentence. Best answer, they got jobs. They oftentimes got the appointment.
Reportedly, some 83% of law professors are Democrats. As a libertarian, you must think this has real-world consequences. What are they?
Well, I think that 83% of all professors are Democrats. And how big a problem is this? You know what? I think libertarians probably agree with those professors about 75% of the time. This is the opportunity we have here to bring together those professors. That's the opportunity we have here to bring together those Democrats along with smaller government. Look, we get to a T in the road when it comes to economics, but if we can agree on so much, you know what? The discussion then opens up to how government is oppressive, to how government is tyrannical, and how we can change to have and actually accomplish lesser government.
If a parent chooses not to send his or her child to school, should the government intervene?
No, the government shouldn't intervene, but what we should have is we should be encouraging educational entrepreneurs to be able to have a crack at being able to educate that child in a way that would suit the parents. I just see an incredible opportunity in this country that has gone unmissed. Look, I think education should be at the state level to start with, 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, but the states that are going to show the best practice are when they involve competition for public education that would reach out to this kid and perhaps satisfy the parents in a way that they're currently not being addressed at all.
Should all drug use be made legal or decriminalized, whether marijuana or heroin? And what do you say about people who argue that if you do that, it would lead to more rampant drug abuse?
In 1999, I was the highest elected official in the United States to call for the legalization of marijuana. I think that's good news. In 2016, I'm still the highest elected official in the United States to call for the legalization of marijuana, although apparently Bernie Sanders is advocating such, and I think a lot of that has to do with his appeal among millennials. Look, I think when we legalize marijuana, we will take a quantum leap in this country with regard to drug use. If we were to legalize all drugs tomorrow, the world would be a much better place. 90% of drug problems are prohibition-related, not use-related. That is not to discount the problems of use and abuse, but that should be the focus.
If you believe in legalizing all drugs, would you at least make certain drugs illegal for children?
Well, the reality reality is that no law is going to pass to legalize drugs unless it contains a provision that children are not allowed to use it. Now that said, as a parent, I mean, my message to my kids was look, I'd be naive to think that you wouldn't be trying these drugs. But the problem with drugs is quality, quantity unknown. It's prohibition. And first and foremost, I love you both. So if you find yourself in a position of being impaired, whether it's alcohol or drugs of any kind, call me, because I'm going to come and I'm going to pick you up because I love you. And that's what we need to tell our kids, is that we love them.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended discrimination in both the private sector and the public sector. Senator Barry Goldwater voted against it for libertarian reasons. He did not feel it was the government's job to tell a private business owner what to do. Senator Al Gore Sr. voted against it because he opposed integration. If you had been in the Senate, how would you have voted?
Yes, I would have signed.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
I think government has a basic responsibility to protect us against individuals, groups, corporations, foreign governments that would do us harm. In that context, a license to drive? You know, I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive. I vetoed a whole lot of bills. I vetoed the haircutting license. I vetoed all sorts of licensing, but license to drive? I mean, you could, arguably, you could have an insurance requirement, I guess, that then the insurance company would determine. I mean, you got people that are blind that would be on the road, I think, that would actually continue to drive until they hurt somebody.
You now have 60 seconds to make a closing argument.
Well, I got to run as a Libertarian in 2012, something I was very honored to carry that banner. I thought my marching orders were to grow the Libertarian Party, and I think because of your efforts more than anyone else's, the Libertarian Party is growing. What I'd like to do is I'd like to fill up your current weekly meeting that's occurring in the treehouse to an auditorium, because thousands of people are going to want to hear this message. And at that meeting, you can tell them, hey, Johnson's not our best candidate, we are, and make that argument. But here it is, we do have an opportunity, and so many of you have worked for so long consistently to provide ballot access with your time and your money. And here it is, we're at a threshold here, a real threshold to grow this party and to make it better. And at the end of the day, shouldn't we try and make things better? Do we get from A to Z? No. Should we be able to articulate Z? Absolutely. But isn't D, if it comes up, if it's an availability, shouldn't we sign on to anything that makes things better? Anything that creates more freedom? Thank you.
Ask a Libertarian Facebook fan page is spreading awareness of libertarianism and informing non-libertarians while empowering those who support liberty on a daily basis. This is your opportunity to be empowered, and let us advocate libertarianism for you at facebook.com/askalibertarian.